Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about UFC 263. I think I'm saying this at the start of every single podcast, but man, what a card UFC 263 is. We got Israel Adesanya coming back to face one of his old rivals in Marvin Vettori. This is a fight that happened a few years back at the beginning of Israel Adesanya's career in MMA, where he won that fight, but it started somewhat of a feud against Marvin Vettori. Marvin Vettori has been on a little bit of a run here, and it has brought him this title shot. Some say that he jumped the queue over some other fighters, but the run that he's been on lately, beating Jack Hermanson and Kevin Holland, and in dominant fashion, using his wrestling and using all of his skills, but I've just noticed the wrestling capabilities that he's shown in his fights, especially his last fight against Kevin Holland, has been spectacular. And not only that, he's displaying his skills, but he's also representing the great country of Italy, which surprisingly enough, and I think most people that are recording podcasts or talking about UFC 263 are talking about the almost magnitude that this could cause in Italy itself. Having an Italian champion could be something great. He would be the first Italian champion, and to do so against Israel Adesanya, who's coming off his loss against John Blachowicz at 205. At that point, he was daring to be great. He went up to the 205-pound division and went up against the champion there. He lost that fight, and some people say that this exposed something about Israel Adesanya, and that was his wrestling. A lot of people thought that he could not be taken down. Some people think that because Israel Adesanya came into that 205-pound contest at such a lower weight compared to the champion, that might have had something to do with why he wasn't able to defend the takedowns against John Blachowicz. But aside from that, we've seen Israel Adesanya go against some killers in the division, using his spectacular striking, and at 185, some good wrestling, especially in a defensive way. He beat Paulo Costa, he beat Yoel Romero, he beat Robert Whittaker, he beat Kelvin Gastelum, and then before that, the fun fight against Anderson Silva. So even before this fight, let's just talk about where Israel Adesanya was before this fight, and before the Blachowicz fight. At that time, we were talking about Israel Adesanya going up to 205, fighting John Jones, who was at that point the UFC 205-pound champion. And we were thinking that Adesanya would go there, maybe even fight him at a heavyweight. We didn't know, but we thought that this guy could do the impossible. Maybe be a 3-belt holding UFC champion. And especially in the UFC, where you're going from 185 to 205 to heavyweight, that's a big time thing to call out for. So, and a lot of people thought that he could do it. Now, this is, I'm not going to say a make or break moment for Israel Adesanya, but this is just putting yourself back into that fire, because Marvin Vettori, using his wrestling, and also I believe that King's MMA striking is going to put him into deep waters, and we're going to have to see what Israel Adesanya is made up, especially after this loss. But we'll get back to that fight. Let's just talk about the rest of the card here. I'm going to go from the beginning. This is how deep this card is. We got Chase Hooper on the early prelims against Steven Peterson. That's going to be a fun fight. Chase Hooper is always fun to watch. Just looking at Chase Hooper's last couple fights, he faced some good guys, but I think the Caceres fight was a real turning point for him, and it showed what happens when you go against a real UFC veteran. But now Chase Hooper back on the early prelims, and he's having a fun fight with Steven Peterson. Let's go to the prelims. Also showing how stacked this card is. Hakeem Dawodu being the first opening fight for the prelims. And Hakeem Dawodu, if you've heard my take on Hakeem Dawodu coming out of the great country of Canada, he's done some really remarkable stuff, especially in his last fight, going up against a real killer in I don't even know how to pronounce his name sometimes, but Tugadov. And he was one of the guys training with Khabib, using that heavy wrestling style. I think they thought that they would go against Hakeem Dawodu in this fight, in his last fight, and run him over and have a straight shot to the belt, but he was not able to do so. Hakeem Dawodu, he's always fun to watch. You guys got to watch out for this guy, and he's facing a Russian. So I don't know if he's gonna fight for his countrymen there, but Hakeem Dawodu, always fun to watch. And then we got Lauren Murphy against Joanne Calderwood. She's a real veteran in the sport. Both of them are, and that's going to be a fun fight as well. Joanne Calderwood coming off a win against Jessica Evil Eye. That was a great fight, but it really showed where Joanne Calderwood now is at in her career. Eric Anders, always fun to watch, and he's going against the great Derek Stewart from the UK. This is going to be a great fight. You know, whenever we see Eric Anderson in any of these fights, even if you look at some of his losses against maybe Khalil Roundtree, he just shows something special. He shows the heart. And even in losses, like I said, against Khalil Roundtree, that was such a fun fight. And he just kept on coming forward. Especially in that fight, I remember Khalil Roundtree came out in that Muay Thai style. It was completely different compared to any of his other fights. And I think it was a real eye-opener for Anderson. He didn't really see that one coming, but he still just kept on coming forward, especially, and we can see with his athletic background, I believe he played D1 college football, great athlete, and he's going against the dentist, one of the best nicknames in MMA. Some other people have used that nickname before, but Darren Stewart, a great, banner holder of that nickname. Then we got Drew Dober, who's at the top of the prelim card, going against Brad Riddell. Brad Riddell is always a hard fight coming out of New Zealand with his countryman Israel Adesanya. Drew Dober coming out of Denver, I believe. He's one great fighter. He had a great fight with Hernandez, and we've seen him before. He has great potential in the UFC. And you can see just by looking at some of his previous fights, he's fought some high-level competition. And don't let his record fool you. This guy is he's at the top of the food chain. He went up against Dariush and gave him a good fight. That one ended in second round submission, but Drew Dober, just that accumulating amount of experience facing the best of the best. It's it can never be unmistaken that he's at the top. Then we got Paul Craig and Craig opening up the main card. He's always fun to watch. What an aggressive fighter. He's always game, and he's always fun to watch. And then right after that, then we get into the real big ones. We got Bilal Muhammad, who his last fight was against Leon Edwards, who's fighting right after him. That one ended in that unfortunate eye poke, so we didn't get a real result to that fight. Unfortunately, I think in that fight, it looked like Bilal Muhammad was getting outclassed at that moment. But now he's going against a real veteran. Some people are saying that it might be his last fight, and it's Demian Maia. Demian Maia, man, he's been in this game for a very long time, and we all know his style, and we all know his game plan going into this is going to be for the submission. That's how all of his fights go, and that's how they're going to go for his whole career. He's trained in one thing and one thing only. I mean, he does train in boxing and all that kind of stuff. We saw that in the Ben Askren fight. But Demian Maia is a real test. He's a person that's going to keep on coming forward, like I've mentioned in some of these fighters before, and he's just going to go for that submission. There's nothing else. But that submission game that he has, that jiu-jitsu that he has, is second to none. Some people have said that he's one of the greatest submission artists, one of the greatest jiu-jitsu practitioners in the UFC, and Bilal Muhammad has a great test in front of him. Now, this test could actually propel him in that hunt for that welterweight championship. But Bilal Muhammad, he's gonna have to pull out a lot of things, but we can see some areas where he could beat Demian Maia, especially on the feet. We've seen Bilal Muhammad piece people up on the feet. And then, like I said a couple times in this podcast now, Demian Maia is going to come forward and look for that submission. That's going to be a fun fight. And we'll see where Bilal Muhammad is, because Demian Maia is that true kind of barometer, especially sitting at that number 9 spot this late in his career, obviously. But I'm also very interested to see where Demian Maia goes after this. What a staple in the UFC. If this is his last fight, it could be, and I think he's using this as a way to figure out where he is in that welterweight division. He's facing against the number 12 guy. He's got a name now because he did fight the number 3 guy in Rocky Leon Edwards, who we're going to talk about now. Leon Edwards having a very interesting match. And very surprisingly to see Nate Diaz pop up this early in a main event after some of the spectacular fights that he's had. Obviously, he has he's fought early in cards before, but especially with the star power and the superstar level that he's at now, Nate Diaz in a UFC first, being in a 5-round fight. We talked about this before. This fight had to be canceled. I forget the actual reason. I think Nate Diaz had to pull out for some reason. But Leon Edwards, after being away from mixed martial arts for so long, is just getting catapulted with the Bilal Muhammad fight, with this Nate Diaz fight. If you had any worries about Leon Edwards not being liked by the UFC brass, this fight here against Nate Diaz just shows you that they're really behind this guy, and they're really willing to give him the fights that he wants. And especially this fight is going to bring a lot of eyeballs. You can already see Nate Diaz popping up on ESPN and all these mainstream platforms talking about this fight. And a lot of people have Leon Edwards winning this fight easily. Now, Nate Diaz is not going to come out there and let you truck him like that. But this is going to be a tough fight for Nate Diaz, going against the number 3 guy, and rightfully the number 3 guy, who has been dominating everybody. And the only person he didn't dominate was the champion in Kamaru Usman. You can just see the type of run that this guy has been on. He's been looking for that UFC belt title shot, actually, for a very long time. His last fight was against Bilal Muhammad, but the fight before that was in 2019. This guy was supposed to fight Khamzat Chimaev. That fight got canceled, I believe, twice. Then he was supposed to fight. It was the second time he was going to fight Khamzat Chimaev, and then Bilal Muhammad stepped in like the true warrior he is. And unfortunately, like I said before, that one couldn't be continued because of the eye poke that Bilal Muhammad suffered. That was a very unfortunate situation. Leon Edwards, he looked like he was on the path to show everybody how dominant he is, especially after a layoff like that. And Bilal Muhammad is no easy out. But let's talk about Nate Diaz a little bit here. Nate Diaz looks like he's really, like I said before with Damian Maia, I think he's using this as a barometer to see where he is in this welterweight division, and also a sneaky way to just blast him to the top of that division and go against the champion in Kamaru Usman, who's been looking for fights like these. You can see that Kamaru Usman is really looking at fights like these. He's talking about the Masvidal rematch, and he's talking about fighting maybe even Jake Paul. I don't think that one's going to happen, but you can see where his mindset is at. And I think if Nate Diaz does beat Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman is one of those champions who, unlike others, is calling out other fighters. Usually it's the challenger calling out the champion. But in this case, Kamaru Usman is calling out his opponents, and Nate Diaz could be one of them. And I think Nate Diaz is in a very good position, especially if you look at his record. In 2016, he fought McGregor, and then McGregor won that one. It ended in a decision. It went all 5 rounds. But he beat him the first time. Obviously, we all know that. I don't have to tell you. But then after that fight, he fought in 2019 against Pettis. Blood and guts war, that one. Man, a Nate Diaz fight you can't say is ever boring. That one ended in a decision. Nate Diaz won that. And then we had the BMF title match in New York that ended with a KO TKO finish. But I believe, and I'm reading this off of UFC.com, but I believe, and I'm like 90% sure that one ended by a doctor stoppage, not by a TKO. And Nate Diaz was profusely bleeding from his face, and the doctor had to call that fight. Unfortunate situation that happened in that BMF title match, and Nate Diaz has talked about fighting Masvidal again. Now, this fight against Leon Edwards is really gonna tell us where he's at in this welterweight division. Nate Diaz has been fighting at the 155-pound division for a little while now. He's fought 155-pounders at that 170 limit. We saw that in the Conor McGregor fight. We've seen that in a couple of his fights now. But now he's really fighting a guy, and who Luke Thomas said spectacularly, saying that Leon Edwards couldn't even make 155 if he chopped off his right leg. This is a true 170er, and we're going to see where Nate Diaz is at in his 170-pound hunt. The next fight after that, wow, I don't even have to sell you guys on this one. Deiveson Figueiredo against Brandon Moreno, fight of the year contender. And surprisingly enough to many people, this one happened at that flyweight division, who so many have called for to be disbanded. But what a performance. What a champion at this 125-pound weight limit in Deiveson Figueiredo, hunting for that knockout, hunting for that submission. He's a guy that's always aggressive, not to say that any of the other champions at this 125-pound limit were boring. And I'm not talking about Mighty Mouse. I'm not talking about Henry Cejudo. They all went for it. It's just that Deiveson Figueiredo has that it factor. A guy with blonde hair and a red stripe through it, with the background of being a hairdresser. And you could see him on UFC embedded videos riding big cows, I believe, or horses and all this kind of stuff. And he's got the it factor, and there's nothing that you can say to go against that. And what a fighting style he has. He put a pace on Brandon Moreno in the first fight, but in many people's opinions, surprisingly to themselves, Brandon Moreno held his own, and he tried putting it on Deiveson Figueiredo. That one ended in a draw, and it just jacks up the anticipation by that much. This one ending in a draw, the amazing way that it was. I think I've talked to a couple of people, and they're hoping that this one is not like the Tyron Woodley and Wonder Boy fight, where that trilogy or that 2-fight series that they had, it left a sour taste in many people's mouth. When a fight is so spectacular the first time, many times it doesn't end up being that the second time. But I think Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno have felt each other's power. They're confident, and it might just be better. On top of that, I don't think many people are talking about this, but Deiveson Figueiredo being a Brazilian champion, great for the great country of Brazil. Many champions in the past coming out from there. I don't have to tell you people how special those fighters were, but also Brandon Moreno, who also is coming from the great country of Mexico with great boxing pedigree, but not many UFC and MMA stars coming out of the great country of Mexico. We've seen Mexican American champions. We've seen it all, but it's always good to get the Mexican fans involved. They're something else. They're amazing. Let's get back to the main event. Israel Adesanya going against Marvin Vettori. What a challenge for Israel Adesanya mentally, I believe, coming off of his first loss in the UFC, and having to go against a guy that you've already fought and has felt your power, felt you in the octagon. And this is a great test, and especially coming off of a loss the way he did, how hyped he was. This is going to show where Israel Adesanya is mentally. I've listened to a couple podcasts now, and people, ex-fighters and fighters, talk about how they overcome losses and how difficult it is mentally to get back on the horse. But I think in this case, it's a little bit different, where Israel Adesanya has faced losses in his kickboxing career, and he's been with the same crew. He's been with that New Zealand crew who's helped him come out of those devastating losses. And I think this is going to be something of the same. You can see in Israel Adesanya's early career in kickboxing that if something like this happened, where he had to face adversary, he just jumped back, and he was he looked great. So, but Marvin Vettori, let's talk about him. Like I said at the top of the podcast, this guy representing Italy, and could be the first Italian champion, and he's got a style that can be very difficult. Now, I'm not saying it's Khabib level wrestling, but I think the mixture of the striking that he shows, but then also the great wrestling that he shows. This is going to be a tough fight for both of these fighters, and it's a great way for this division to move on, and for the champion to come back and maybe stick his flag back into that middleweight division, or it could be a new era. Now, I think if Marvin Vettori wins, I don't know if we're going to see an immediate rematch. There's going to be 2 losses for Israel Adesanya if it does happen. And Marvin Vettori might just have to face Robert Whittaker after this, who Dana White has said multiple times is next in this middleweight division. But if Israel Adesanya wins, I think he's just going to stick in this middleweight division and just do the Kamaru Usman thing and start running through people again. He's going to try to, and he's going to have to face Robert Whittaker. I think either way, these guys are going to have to face Robert Whittaker in their next fight, and the loser will have to fight someone else. They can't just wait. I think this is just the situation that we're in. Just overall about this 263 card, I think it's flying a little bit under the radar, especially with the last weekend's fight with Floyd Mayweather going against Logan Paul. But I think it's starting to pick up steam. We're starting to realize, and I think a lot of the people are starting to realize that UFC 263 is such a stacked card. We just went through it. And it's starting to pick up a little bit of steam. Now, hopefully it picks up a lot more steam in the coming days right before the fight. And I think people will recognize how amazing and spectacular this one is, especially for that Arizona crowd who are getting some special stuff, especially with their team in the NBA. And now they're getting UFC. I think those guys are getting spoiled over there. But it's going to be a great fight. It's going to be a great card. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time and listening to the podcast. It means a lot. If you guys could like the video, if you're listening to it on YouTube, or subscribe to the channel if you have not, that'd be amazing. If you can give a review on iTunes and give 5 stars on all the podcast platforms, that'd be amazing. I really appreciate it. Like I said, thank you for listening to this podcast. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.